I now have the honour of inviting Taoiseach Enda to address the Assembly, and I would like to acknowledge also his continued commitment to East-West cooperation, and no doubt we'll get an insight into his vision for future East-West cooperation. So, Taoiseach, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Joe said to me, when you come down here, speak in Irish to them. So that means we're going to conduct this entirely as Gaeilge, and you're all very welcome. Listen, co-chairs and distinguished members, fellow parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, welcome here to the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham, and thank you, Joe and Lawrence, for the diligence and the commitment that you're showing in the co-chairing of the BIPA, the British-Irish Parliamentary Association. I know that you've had a pretty busy time since we met last in Letterkenny, and you had your 47th plenary in London in October. I recall the first plenary in London so many years ago, and the advice from a well-known former Las Cancol of the Dáil was to engage with the British, show them we don't have horns, that it's well worthwhile negotiating and talking to the Irish. And we went over there, and you came over here, and it went over and back for a number of years, and there were outings on the golf course and long discussions afterwards, and things began to work very well, and it's evolved to a very strong point, I might say now. I must say that my own experience of being a member of the British-Irish Parliamentary Association when it was first set up, and all the years in between, have certainly given me an insight into British politics, into the way the Mother of Parliament works, and that relates also to the understanding I have with the British Prime Minister in the context of what we do, both at the European Council and in respect of the bilateral arrangements that we have between Ireland and Britain. So you're actually building new relationships yourselves with different politicians, new politicians, with the people and the different communities. And I think it's a great thing for this BIPA, with new members on it, to get to know other new members from across the Commons and across the different parties, to get to know each other in the sense of what we all stand for and how we can work together in the common interests of our two countries. 20 years ago, it was imagination only that would say to you that Her Majesty the Queen of England would come here on a royal visit, and that the President of our country, President Higgins, would go on a return formal state visit to Britain. And not only is Her Majesty able to speak our language, and the language that she did speak was very well spoken with as we call it, a fluency, or the Irish word is blas for that. And I understand that the British monarchy are actually tweeting in Irish. They learned this from Commander Hadfield from the space station, and last Friday Buckingham Palace sent out its tweets, as Gaeilge, that means in Irish, about the visit of our President to Britain next week. So, the last time I was down at Windsor Castle was in the 1970s as a tourist. I have to have the privilege to go there next week to accompany the President and his good wife at a state occasion in Windsor Castle, and that's a celebration of our Irish spirit, and culture will be demonstrated at the Albert Hall as well. So when you think about it, what you have helped to put in place is an understanding, a negotiation either way, that these things were able to happen, and that Her Majesty the Queen was able to come here on a royal visit, and our President be able to return that formally. And I have to say this, and Irish members will know it, that when she did come here, she made an exceptional effort to engage with the Irish people. And there was a reticence in the beginning as to whether people should turn out in numbers to see the Queen passing by. And by the time she got to Cork, this was a very homely, warm atmosphere, epitomised indeed by Pat O'Connell's demonstration to her of what a mother-in-law fish was down in the English market, when he's a most gregarious character with great experience. And actually, after the sort of protocol, people went down there and said to him, well, how do you think we're going to be able to agree? He said, well, first of all, you shouldn't have the counter between me and her. She's a very welcome visitor. And he showed her an exceptionally ugly fish with its mouth wide open. And she said, what is the name of that fish? And he said, it's a monkfish, but here we call it mother-in-law fish, which was the point of laughter between the two of them, which went around the world, the Queen of England engaging with an Irish fishmonger, whom she received in Buckingham Palace just last week. So the state visit, if you like, points out the warmth that is now generated between our two peoples, the age that we now have as a very strong relationship between the two islands, one that will bring prosperity to peoples across the water, over and back, north and south on this island, and, as I say, on both sides of the Irish Sea. So that's why I'm pleased to see Joe and Lawrence, the twin themes of work and jobs, dominate your plenary programme here. I know that Richard Bruton, our Minister for Jobs and Enterprise, will have spoken to you this morning, and tomorrow you'll hear from the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Brendan Howlin, who has carried out a very difficult job here, given the very difficult economic circumstances over the last number of years, in putting a programme of reform into the public service and the difficulties with expenditure and expenditure ceilings in the country here. So on these islands, our economies are open. We're not immune, obviously, to the vagaries of the world in which we conduct our trade and export our goods and do more and better business. Increasingly, we have to rely on each other. I think it was important to note this, that only 2 months ago, the first troika, if you like, went off to Singapore in terms of a comprehensive trade mission. And Secretary of State Villiers will understand this, with Northern Ireland participation, British participation, and participation from here ourselves. And clearly, there are niche areas that each can cover very comprehensively, and it was a triumvirate going to Singapore. In March of 2012, Prime Minister Cameron and I concluded our joint statement on British-Irish relations, which we entitled The Next Decade. And that set out, if you like, a vision of closer cooperation between Britain and Ireland, and identified a whole range of areas where we could actually advance things. I mean, we know that there are 50,000 Irish people on the boards of British companies. This is a very significant contribution over the years to the British economy, the British country, and the infrastructure of Britain. So, obviously, there's a great deal of work to be done in extensive programme through the annual summit meetings. And I have to say that a great deal of interaction between senior officials about a lot of these things. The second annual summit took place recently in Downing Street when I was over there. The Prime Minister and I discussed the progress that had been made in the past 12 months and looked at what we might achieve in the next 12 months. In fact, in the last 12 months, we've achieved quite a deal. We published the joint economic study. We had the joint trade mission that I referred to. Continued work on the introduction of a reciprocal short common travel area, or CTA visa. In fact, there's a real energy here from a hospitality and tourism perspective to be able to market Britain and Ireland with a common visa, particularly with interest now from China and India, where huge numbers of people are beginning to travel on an annual basis. And I think that's a real demonstration of commitment to economic engagement and expansion in two countries on a common visa in an area about which there's very little difficulty. And last year, I have to say, I was privileged indeed to be able to go to Flanders Field with Prime Minister David Cameron, an Irish Taoiseach, a British Prime Minister, to stand there under the Peace Tower in Messines, to go and visit the grave of Willie Redmond, who was an MP for 32 years in the Commons from County Clare, who joined the British Army in the Great War, the centenary of which we commemorate this year, and urged others to do so on the basis of the freedom of small nations and the hope that were Britain to win that war, that Home Rule would apply for Ireland. These were difficult times for our people afterwards. And having lost 50,000 people, believe me, if you haven't been there, it's quite an emotional experience to go to Flanders and still see the craters of the greatest man-made non-nuclear explosion in history, which took place there on the Messines Ridge. And I have to say, when you see the Menin Gate with all those 50,000 plus names, including 3 brothers who died in 2 days from Dublin here with the Fusiliers, and see that every Friday since 1928, The last post is played there at that gate by local buglers. It's a powerful, if you like, evocation of of what war was about. And for young people, it makes a striking impact. I have to say, it was a very cold day when we were there, Lawrence, and the local school came down and sang Stille Nacht in the place where the Germans played the British in the famous match during the Peace and Christmas Day. Believe me, cold or not, it's a poignant moment to pass by all those little graveyards and headstones to unknown soldiers and known soldiers who are nothing more than young lads and young men fighting in that war. And when Queen Elizabeth came here and recognised the contribution that they'd made at the Memorial in Island Bridge, that too was a very significant moment, because when the survivors from Ireland who came back after the Great War, they were not recognised by the governments for many years. And it was only many years afterwards that an amnesty was shown to them. And they had a right and a belief to fight for freedom of small nations or for king and country, whichever their issue was. You see all over our country now, little peace parks springing up, where those who fought from every county in all the wars, Protestant and Catholic, are commemorated in various ways throughout the country. You'd be surprised at the numbers who travel from abroad to see the place where long-lost relatives came from who would have fought. And Prime Minister Cameron was able to locate the final resting place of a number of his own ancestors who fought in the Great War. So that was, for me, I have to say, in many ways, a powerful moment of connection between our two countries. Now, I understand that a committee, Joe, of the association has been undertaking an analysis on the progress to date on the implementation of both the Good Friday Agreement and the Belfast Agreement and the St Andrews Agreement, with a view to identifying outstanding issues that we might bring forward recommendations for further action. I know that this is difficult, but I very much welcome this work and look forward to any findings or recommendations that are brought through here. Through the Good Friday Agreement, the people on all parts of this island, north and south, have made clear their commitment to peace and to a society founded on mutual respect, on equal rights and on opportunities. As the Good Friday Agreement did open up not just economic opportunities, but it would open up hearts and minds and a great sense of a future where all the communities dwell deep in each other's shelter and never in each other's shadow. In other words, connection and interdependence are really important things here. And it's vital that the parties work to develop and enrich this sense across our land. And that shows that the peace process and politics really do matter, and that politics can make a difference. Now, certainly the political situation in Northern Ireland remains more fragile than we would have wished. All parties have to stay absolutely focused on the prize of enduring, lasting and solidity of peace. And that's why I welcome the recommendations of the party leader talks. I met with Dr. Haas in New York recently during the St. Patrick's Week celebrations and had a reflection with him on the outcome of the talks that he had in regard to the parades, past activities, and so on. And it's a difficult journey, but our destination of peace and prosperity is very well worthwhile. One thing I did myself as Taoiseach was actually to meet groups from Northern Ireland, from both sides of the community, who have a very raw sort of emotion inside them that has never been concluded. And this is difficult, whether it be families where people have belonged to the so-called disappeared, or for instance the single survivor and the relative of the Kingsmill massacre. Go and talk to them. I brought them down to government buildings and spent 3 hours listening to the reservoir of unmended hurt, that these things were never concluded. Or the people of Ballymurphy who lost so many loved ones over a 2 or 3 day period. And while it's many years ago, that emotion is as raw as it was very shortly afterwards. I mentioned this to the Prime Minister when I was over in Downing Street, because these things are very powerful, but at the same time it's very important for people to be able to speak to the political process about what might be done. And I know you have to inch forward in a slow but but sure fashion. So what we've said here, that following the invitation from the First and Deputy First Minister, both governments are very supportive of what has to be done here by the parties in Northern Ireland. I noted President Clinton's words in Derry, finish the job. And we've started this 20 years ago. You've moved a very long way. There are a number of issues that do need to be dealt with, and dealt with they must be. And they can't be dealt with from outside, as many might assume. It's got to come from inside, with encouragement from the outside. This is about the peoples of the North, essentially. And I don't want to see genuinely a sort of blockage by the political process clinging to the past, when so many young people want to get around that and open up the adventure of the future. Because the world we live in is changing very rapidly, and the digital frontiers and the opportunities that present themselves out there are in reach, and they're available at the touch of a button. And we need to be able to build on the sort of confidence levels in Northern Ireland. And we're very happy in this border activity, health or education or infrastructure. We're not flush with money ourselves, but we do want to understand, and want people to understand, that with the cooperation that we have, this is very important. And we get cooperation from the United States and from the European Union. And that's why during the presidency last year, we were in a position to get extra monies for the peace dividend, and that's to be used for sensitive communities where young men in particular are often driven down the wrong road in the sense of criminality and see no hope at all or a way out. In that sense, you've got to really commit to working with communities all the time. I spoke to President Obama about this in the White House during the St. Patrick's Week celebrations over there, and so on. So I want to give recognition here, Joe and Lawrence, to the steps that have been taken by First Minister Peter Robinson and Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness in continuing on the journey for a more united and reconciled Northern Ireland. These things are important. And it is important that people, while we can have differences of opinion, would see the First and Deputy First Minister working in the interests of the Northern Ireland economy and therefore its people. When they went to China, we were able to give them the facilities of our own ambassador, who was a fluent Chinese speaker at the time. The same thing applied in Japan or other places around the world where trade missions might be there in parallel or might cross their paths. And in that sense, we're very happy to continue to work with our colleagues in the interests of demonstrating jobs and opportunities. So both governments are making every effort to have a speedy recovery and economic cohesion throughout the island. We've had discussions about this as part of our programme in Downing Street. With the Northern Ireland Executive, we're looking to see how you can get best effect from public funds being used for the delivery of services for people in need to make their lives and their communities work better. And we want to see good results this year, and we hope to see good results this year. So as members of this association, better than most, the importance of political engagement at all levels to provide that leadership that drives that reconciliation. Because politics on its own are not good enough. It won't deal with all the issues. Civil society is crucial in sharing a genuinely reconciled society. You have to have that sense of trust and belief from one community to the next. It's not just enough to forgive. I believe that we have to forgive as well. That means that each of us give a little bit in advance, like a down payment of trust, an investment in or a step into a better future. We have to look beyond the curve and say, where do we want Northern Ireland to be in 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What is our picture? And what can we do as those who have some measure of responsibility now to assist that? So I want to say here to you, as Joint Chairman, we will support every move that we can that helps this process. Each year, our own reconciliation and anti-sectarianism funds provides almost €3 million to hundreds of groups, large and small, in the community and in the voluntary sector, working to create understanding of the different traditions in this island. I was up there on the Short Strand a couple of years back, and on both sides they had children from either end in the jerseys of the different sporting clubs, showing them that the game the game is played irrespective of the traditions or the belief or the backgrounds. So for the sake of coming generations, I often say the only other that we think of has to be each other, because a wall between does not differentiate in the fact that we have a shared humanity and a shared island, and therefore we should work in every way we can to make that possible. And that's why young people are the key, and we focus on them, Joe, to give them hope, a shared and a prosperous future, and a sense of understanding that they have an opportunity to play their part themselves. And the groups that we support demonstrate that will of the majority to forge and to nurture reconciliation throughout the island. So we can be sure that relationships were forged and nurtured across that divide in Flanders and on the fields and on the farms of the Somme. When Willie Redmond was shot and very badly wounded on the Messine Ridge, he was carried by a Protestant on his back for a half a mile to the convent where he received treatment. And while he died there, the convent later was moved, but the grave remains there now in the middle of a ploughed field. So for the first time in that great war to end all wars, where you had Protestant and Catholic fighting in the interests of the Allies and the British Army, north and south, first time it ever happened, the opportunity to harness that sort of connection is an unstoppable force if we get it right in peacetime for the good of the economy and the good of jobs. So we're starting, as you know, into the decade of commemorations encompassing the Ulster Covenant, the Great War, the Easter Rising, and through on to independence and partition. We set up a committee here, obviously with the assistance of professional historians, to see that these things are done sensitively and comprehensively and understanding on all sides of what's involved. So we take the opportunity of new relationships on and across the islands to build understanding and trust over this decade of commemorations. So 2012 to 2022 sees a whole range of centenaries and other milestones in the history on the island of Ireland. We have to use them not to reflect just on what we have done, in what we have yet to consider doing, for and with and on behalf of each other for years to come. So your association has done important work in considering these issues. I'm pleased that the Irish Government is supporting a number of commemorative projects through the reconciliation funds. The events of this period shaped relations between Britain and Ireland for the century that followed. British-Irish partnership on significant commemorative events is therefore an important aspect of the commemorative programme. That's why the exhibitions have taken place in the Great Hall in the Commons and in Dublin, in Belfast, in North and South. Taoiseach was up laying a wreath on Armistice Day. I was in Enniskillen myself, which was poignant to both to be there, but also, if you like, to see the cooperation of the laying of a laurel wreath amongst all the poppies, the singularity of peoples and their wish to live in peace. So, you know, certain historical events will call for joint cooperation and for attendance. And with plans taking shape now for the centenary commemorations of the 1916 Rising, it is the hope that representatives of the royal family and the British government will be hosted in Dublin when those commemoration ceremonies take place. Ceremonial events around the First World War, including the commemoration of the outbreak of war, the Battle of the Somme and the Armistice, are also opportunities to reflect on and to better understand our shared experiences through that war. The lamps may have gone out all over Europe, but with the Good Friday Agreement, here the flame of hope was lit. The partnership that we celebrate allows us the strengthening of that hope and light. The British-Irish Parliamentary Association has been a light for a very long time. You have been at the forefront of the development of British-Irish relations for many years, and I would like to thank you for what you've done and wish you, Joe and Lawrence and all the members, every continued success for your efforts into the future. This is a time for confidence. This is a time for courage. This is a time for steadfastness and for understanding that if the peoples work together, if the governments work together, the opportunity for prosperity and for peace for the future for millions of people is at hand. Thank you. Questions? Are there any questions there? Do you want to take a few questions, Joe?
Yeah, that'd be great,
Yeah,
Taoiseach.
sure.
Yeah.
At the back.
Joe O'Reilly might want to start it off there, and then Paul Flynn, followed by Paul.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Teacher. Thank you, Taoiseach, for your address and for your ongoing, very deep personal commitment to North, South and East, West relations. And I welcome that. I think you would agree, Taoiseach, that the proposed, which is imminent, it's coming into law tonight, I gather, the proposed HGV levy that the UK government are introducing threatens economic cooperation along the border. It will be a disincentive to economic cooperation, and it will increase the cost of commodities and greatly jeopardise jobs in the haulage sector and across a number of other sectors in the border catchment area. So for that reason, it's very serious socially and economically. And I want to acknowledge, Taoiseach, that you raised it with Premier Cameron. I also want to acknowledge that Minister Varadkar is raising it in the North-South ministerial body. But nevertheless, it is being introduced. And I understand that the UK government have now admitted that they were not aware of the full implications of it in an Irish context. And I suppose, Taoiseach, that first of all, and I'd like your comment on that, that raises the possibility that this body should be used more for a warning system in that regard, that this particular British-Irish parliamentary body should have more of a role in flagging difficulties like that to the sovereign governments if legislation or taxes are going to prejudice unity and cooperation. So that's number one. Number two, Taoiseach, what do you think are the prospects that we can ease this and that we can return to a relatively normal situation of trade and eliminate the levy effectively, or at least open up most of the roads to have it eliminated there? It's very serious in my particular constituency. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to raise it.
Okay, I'll take a number maybe, Taoiseach, because there's a few offering. Paul Flynn, followed by Andrew Rosendale.
Thank you very much for your reference to the start of this organisation as the body, now the Assembly. And it's certainly true that there was a deep gulf of misunderstanding between the British Parliament and the Oireachtas back in the late 80s, early 90s. And it wasn't, it was on both sides. There was this myth of horns of the opposition, and the coming together has been something that's been remarkable, and it has served a vital purpose. I'm delighted to hear the attention that's given to the life of Willie Redmond. If anyone is a unifying force between North and South in this country, somebody who genuinely fought for the rights of small nations, that he was opposed to the Boer War, and he saw the dangers of a German victory, and his speech that he made a few days before he died is one I think that we should all know, and I'd like to see the commemorations concentrate on his words and his life and sacrifice becoming better known in both our countries.
Can I say on behalf of everyone from the United Kingdom how much we admire your determination to strengthen that relations between the people of the United Kingdom and the people of Ireland, and the warm relationship you have with our Prime Minister David Cameron. There is, of course, lots of ways in which we can strengthen that relationship in years to come. I wonder how possible it might be at some stage in the future for Ireland to rejoin the family of Commonwealth nations. There are 2.5 billion people around the world who are members of the Commonwealth, and in each of those countries, English, Irish, Scots and Welsh ancestors are there. And the one missing place at the table at all these Commonwealth events is Ireland, and I think that most people in the United Kingdom would dearly love to see Ireland take its place back as part of the Commonwealth family. How possible might that be?
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Final contributor in this batch, Sean Rogers.
Thank you, and Taoiseach. In terms of the flame of hope is lit, I agree with that. will you make sure that major infrastructure projects like the A5 and the Narrow Water Bridge are kept on the agenda? Thank you.
Here we go. Joe, yes, this is an important issue. First of all, when the British-Irish Association was set up in the very beginning, it was used as a link between the two governments on issues of politics, whether it be about opportunities for work or the transport systems across the Irish Sea or whatever. I recall on many occasions debates between the politicians, and there were political debates about what might be done. So there's no reason why that shouldn't be able to continue where it's warranted in the sense of issues that are of considerable importance either side. Yes, we did discuss the question of the HGV levy with the Prime Minister in the Cabinet room. Clearly we went through the impact of this. Deputy Phelan had been in touch with me and others about the impact of it, and I know you'd met the truckers yourselves. And I think the point made was that okay, there's a need for greater understanding about what it actually means in Irish context. We made a specific case about the A5 that this would be exempt, and obviously on the Prime Minister's instructions, and that matter is being examined. I know it's being introduced this evening. I am aware of the sort of better understanding that's available now in terms of its impact on Ireland. It remains to be seen what can come from those discussions. Paul, yes, there was a degree of tension, lack of understanding, lack of history of connection way back in the 80s. That's all gone. People now can, make contact with each other at will, and that's very good. Yes, I think Herman Van Rompuy, President of the Council, is actually bringing the European Council to Flanders Field at the date of the start of the commemoration of the Great War. We'll see to it that the point you make about Willie Redmond as a unifying force is brought to the fore again. I have to say, standing there with the British Prime Minister, both at the in Tyne Court and the Menin Gate, was a symbol of the way things have moved on. Actually, with the difficulties in the Crimea recently, it's worth noting that 30,000 Irish men lost their lives in the fighting for the British in that war, 50,000 in the Great War, with so many more casualties of it. Andrew, I think the question of the link between Ireland and the UK has never been stronger now for very many years. At a political level, at a trade level, at a cooperation level. We supported the Irish Open going up there a couple of years ago with Rory McIlroy. You have the Giro d'Italia this year. The Olympic flame came through Northern Ireland down to Dublin. These were all, connections that could not have happened previously. I think the question of the Commonwealth obviously is one not for an immediate decision, but I do think we can build on the trade links that are already there. We don't have the resources to have embassies and consular offices in many countries, but the Commonwealth are there. And I think the demonstration by the three ministers visiting Singapore on a trade mission speaks for itself. The Commonwealth has leverage to open new markets, both for Britain and Ireland in so many ways, and I think we should start and build on that platform. I believe that it was very successful. Sean, the A5, yes, obviously there were some legal difficulties about sections of that. We committed monies to it, they still stand. Obviously, that was reduced from what it was originally because of the catastrophic impact of the economic collapse here, but we were happy to support that. Narrow water, obviously, this wasn't able to be undertaken on this particular round because of the scale of the difference between the tenders and the amounts of money allocated in the first place. I've tabled this on the North-South ministerial discussions which took place in June, which have been hosted here in Dublin, and we'll try and revive this. My view is, though, is that obviously you're going to have a different type of bridge here. I think there's no dissent about the importance of having the link across. But it was a case of where you had significant monies put up under the European programme and from both councils, but the tenders were vastly in excess of that. Either that means a different style of a bridge or whatever. It's something that we intend to keep very much alive, and it will be the focus of discussions at the North-South Ministerial in June.
Okay, thanks, Taoiseach. Mark Pritchard, followed by Bob Walter.
A European Commission that works well and a European Union that works well is good for Ireland and for the United Kingdom. You'll be aware, Taoiseach, of discussions in the UK about wanting to see major reform of the European Union, some of which you may or may not agree with. On the issue of free movements of peoples, do you think that is something that should be part of a general discussion, a wider reform discussion within the European Union? And if so, do you think it will require a treaty change?
Thank you, Mark. Bob Walter, followed by Sean Conlon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your address, Taoiseach. Ireland is a member of both the OSCE and the Council of Europe, and one member state has annexed part of another member state. The European Union has responded with some sanctions, travel bans, which come at very little cost. Do you believe the European Union can unite in relation to Russia's annexation of Crimea?
Okay, thank you, Bob. Sean Conlon, followed by Paul Coughlin.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow on from my constituency colleague Joe Riley's point in relation to the foreign toll tax, the issue of cabotage is also a very serious issue for Irish haulage at the moment, and for people from the UK to understand that it's going to increase significantly transport costs between the two islands. And I believe at Committee B this morning we've decided to do a report on this, and we'll be reporting for the next plenary in terms of what we can do as islands and between each jurisdiction to try and have maybe a common area that we don't impose foreign toll taxes on other member states of the Assembly, and we try to have an arrangement in place where cabotage would not apply throughout the islands, because surely the whole purpose of this body is to free up trade, to have an all-Ireland economy on this island, and obviously to free up trade between the islands. So, Taoiseach, in terms of the possibility of that happening, if that could be raised in relation to cabotage as well as the foreign toll tax. And finally, just in relation to the issue of the A5, I think it's very welcome that it's been raised by yourself with David Cameron, but I also believe that the A1, the road from Dublin to Belfast, and the A3, the road from the border counties of Cavan and Monaghan to Belfast, and it should also be included in that arrangement, because clearly for people in South Ulster and along the border, it's very important that we're not crippled by this tax.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Paul Coughlin, followed by Pascal Mooney.
No one doubts your interest and efforts, Taoiseach, in regard to further progress in the North. And as you say yourself, relations here within this body were never stronger, and equally so your own relations with the British Prime Minister and the British Government. But I think there's a feeling, I get a sense here that there's a feeling that to make further progress, there's a need for communities, at community level in the North, to engage more if we're to advance a HAS. And with elections in the offing up there, must we not be patient for another while, would you agree? While we, of course, we will continue all our efforts, as I know you will yourself.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Pascal Mooney, followed by John Crowd.
I applaud the underlying theme of reconciliation in your presentation and the tolerance and understanding that you show to the differing traditions in this island, and long may you continue to do so. And I think that it's a benchmark for our members from the UK that gives an insight from the leader of our country into the general sentiments that he expressed would be reflected generally throughout this country in terms of the relationship and ongoing relationship between Britain and Ireland. I'd also just like to add my voice to that of my colleagues from the border counties in relation to the HGV, to the levy, and I would hope that you will continue to make representations in this regard, because it's a very, very serious issue. Could I also ask you that in the context of the proposed referendum to either stay or withdraw the United Kingdom from the European Union, you have expressed your concern publicly in this regard. You have conveyed your support for, insofar as one can, looking from the outside in, that the UK will make a decision to stay in. But do you think that it is that if this referendum takes place, that perhaps that it should highlight Irish self-interest in this regard? For example, if the United Kingdom opt out of the European Union, the possibility is that there could be the reintroduction of border controls on the only land frontier between Britain and Ireland, which is in the north, which will have devastating effects on cross-border trade, and indeed on the whole theme that you have been sustaining throughout your stewardship of this country. So I'm wondering if you have any concerns in that regard. And could I finally ask you, what is your position in relation to the granting of votes to the Irish diaspora? As you know, the Constitutional Convention, which you set up and has been looking at constitutional matters here in the Republic, has debated this issue and have made certain recommendations. The Irish and Britain organisation are constant attenders at plenary sessions and constantly feed in to committee deliberations. So we're very aware of the importance of the diaspora, and I'd like to compliment Lord Dubs in this regard during his tenure in his committee, who looked at highlight issues relating to the diaspora. So do you have a view in regard to this as to how you can progress what is now becoming an increasing request from the diaspora to be engaged in local political engagement?
Okay, thanks, Pascal. There are 5 more members indicating to speak, so maybe could I ask, I know there's no point asking for brevity, you're not going to follow my instructions, but please, if I could once again ask for brevity, and I understand the Taoiseach's under time constraint as well, and we appreciate you being here. John Crown, followed by Lindsay Whittle.
Gurmagat, thank you. Taoiseach, you're very welcome, and I also would like to join in the gratitude to you for all you've done for Anglo-Irish relations. Taoiseach, very quick question. Due to the unique situation we have in our country, in our republic, of a constitutional recognition that our people live in 2 separate jurisdictions, and the very unusually high percentage of our citizens who have emigrated, including 1 million born in Ireland who reside in the UK, I would, following up on Senator Pascal Mooney's comment, just ask you, is it your intention as we look at the issue of Seanad reform to ensure that in future Seanad Éireann, which is one of the only, really the only body in the Irish Parliament, in the Irish Oireachtas, for which Irish people who live in the north and who live abroad can have a say, that their rights will be continued and hopefully expanded in any planned reforms which we're making to the Seanad? Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Lindsay Whittle, followed by Danny Kinahan.
Good afternoon, Taoiseach. All the Celtic countries have a history of exporting our most important assets. That's our young people. None, I have to say, so blatant as Ireland. The first sight I saw as I drove along the Liffey when I arrived was, get your United States work permits and visas here. Now, would I be right if I was a young person thinking that I'm being educated and trained in Ireland only to help me leave this country? And if I was a visiting investor, that message would put me off, actually, because it's telling me that the best talent is on its way out. Now, I think it is important for young people to gain world experience. Simple question, how do we get them back?
Thanks, Lindsay. Danny, followed by Frank Feehan.
Thank you very much indeed, and I also add my thanks as an Ulster Unionist to all the work that you've done to try and get us all working together, and indeed this body here. But do you recognise that the sort of final twist of the Haas talks was maybe one step too far, and that we have to find our way around that, and also that we need fresh air on Stormont to get it to work better so that we can change and move towards normal government?
Thanks, Danny. Frank Feehan, followed by Sean Crowe.
Taoiseach, you alluded to our report today on the British-Irish Assembly and implementation of the Good Friday, Belfast and St Andrews Agreement. There were some key conclusions, recommendations. Just the committee believed that the 2 agreements had a huge, significant and transformative effect on security, politics, economic and social opportunity on the island of Ireland, and in Northern Ireland in particular. What exactly the two recommendations, or one conclusion we've come out of, is the committee were very disappointed that the obligation of reporting on the implementation of the agreement has not been conducted in a meaningful or regular way, and there were gaps that need to be addressed. And the committee strongly recommends that the British and Irish governments now, as guarantors of the agreement, and the Northern Ireland executives should each establish a mechanism for formally reporting on the implementation of all aspects. And we'll be pushing this, but I would look for your views on that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Frank. And our final contributor is Sean Crowe, TD.
Margaret, and it's on the same issue, Taoiseach. I don't want to take your speech out of context, but when you spoke in terms of moving inch by inch forward in a mature fashion, just the alarm bells go off in relation to, you're talking about the North in relation to that type of mindset. I think what Deputy Feehan is saying is in relation to the huge gaps that are still there in relation to the Good Friday Agreement, the fact that the 2 governments were the guarantors to the agreement, the fact that years later we still haven't got, you know, the basic things like dealing with the past, the victims, sectarianism is growing, human rights haven't been addressed. All those gaps that are there, and I suppose what I'd like to hear an Irish government and a British government saying that we want, our mindset and our hopes and our vision is to giant steps forward, not inch by inch.
Thanks. Mark mentioned about the European Union and the Britain's view towards it. We've been very strong supporters of what the Prime Minister stands for here in the sense of elimination of red tape, the capacity of the single market, the digital market, the removal of physical borders has taken place, but not the removal of digital borders. Clearly, the mandate that Ireland achieved during its presidency for the TTIP talks, or the talks between Europe and the United States, carries with it the opportunity for at least a couple of million jobs either side of the Atlantic, and more importantly, the setting down of the conditions for world trade for the next 50 years. These are issues that are even more important now, given the Crimea and the annexation of Crimea by Russia. So that's an issue that we need to look at. In the case of free movement of people, this is a part and parcel of the fundamentals of the European Union, free movement of people. Britain is not a member of Schengen, nor are we. And clearly, if we were a member of Schengen and Britain is not, then border controls go up again and make all of that difficulty. So that's an issue. Will this require treaty change? I think the next 18 months will see quite a deal of development about where Europe's headed now. The economic catastrophe that befell Europe is being rectified slowly but surely, maybe not as fast as people would like. Nobody's happy with the situation where 26 million people are out of work, 6 to 9 million young people. This requires, countries to be in a position to make serious changes in their cost competitiveness and how they deal with their productivity and all the rest of it. The ECB this week will make probably a very serious landmark decision to be watched with great interest as to what they actually do. So I can't answer the question for you. If you're going to have treaty change, this is an issue that is taken with a great deal of seriousness by a lot of countries. In our case here, we have a constitution. Depending on the transfer of any powers that are involved, it is a matter for the Attorney General to advise the government as to whether a treaty change is warranted and therefore a referendum. We actually were the only country in the Eurozone to be required to hold a referendum on the Fiscal Stability Treaty. This happened right slap bang in the middle of the worst period of the recession, and yet the Irish people voted 60-40 in favour of the Fiscal Stability Treaty, despite the fact of our very close links with Britain, and obviously our future being linked with the Euro, the Eurozone, and the capacity of that market. I'd make this point here, Mark. In Ireland here, we've had so many referenda over the years. Our people, our electorate, are actually very used to referenda. They understand the difference between the Commission, the Parliament and the Council, and that triangle of power is well understood. Europe has helped to transform this country over the last 40 years. So will there be another requirement for treaty change? I can't say. Once you start that process or that negotiation or those discussions, any country could decide to say we need a whole range of issues here. It may well be that some of the changes that are proposed are very minor and may not require treaty change, but it's a matter that lies up in front of us for the future. In respect of the question from Sean about can the European Union unite in respect of the annexation of the Crimea? Well, I have to say at the last 2 European Council meetings there was a very serious mood there. There was an understanding that this is wrong, not accepted, not recognised. But be that as it may, the situation has evolved to where the people have voted in whatever capacity for joining the Russian Federation and have been annexed. Now, Europe has responded very strongly here. In fact, it's slightly more difficult for Europe than any other entity, because of the fact that many of the countries bordering Russia are so dependent upon gas or upon materials or spare parts if they're members of NATO and so on like that. Not so easy if economic sanctions kick viciously in the case of a country that might be 80-85% dependent upon Russian gas for their energy levels. So the situation was that what you'd like to think is that Ukraine would be a buffer between East and West, and that the people of the Ukraine would be winners out of this, but that the responsibility lies with them to make that decision. That's why Europe responded by saying, we'll sign the political elements of this agreement now, we'll put 11 billion on the table, will reduce tariffs for exports from Ukraine into European markets. We'll sign the political agreement with Moldova and Georgia by early June. We will provide assistance for an OSCE mission there of 500-600 people and supply equipment and all of that for the Ukrainian border forces. I think the important thing here is that when Yanukovych left, the Ukrainian people did not destroy the presidential palace. There are no evidence of people being beaten or raped or murdered or whatever. There was the invasion of the television studio and the sacking of that, which is not acceptable in any circumstances. But here's an opportunity now where the Union, aided by others, wants to assist here. And agreements be put in place. It's evolved to a point where President Putin rang President Obama. There's a dialogue going on about what happens from here on. Russians have said they have no interest in furthering any other annexation of parts of Ukraine. Now, this is a very difficult situation. When you don't really appreciate the extent of the depth of culture of the Ukrainian people and what it means, the scale of the country, these things are always difficult to decide. Can Europe unite? Yes. Obviously, if Gazprom increased the cost of gas to Ukraine from 200 to 400 per cubic metre by the end of the month, this is what other countries are already paying. And that's why the nature of the debate on Europe on energy is going to have to change. Elimination of the energy islands, as they're called, and other opportunities to make Europe independent in terms of its energy. That's why the European Council decided on interconnectors being facilitated from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, where there's a fully integrated market around the Pyrenees and the rest of Europe, southern Mediterranean and the southern corridor from Ukraine. These are areas that were parts of the discussion that took place the other day. Yes, Sean, A1, A3, dealt with A5. It remains to be seen whether the impact of the full impact of what this means for Irish hauliers to Northern Ireland and vice versa is actually understood, and if it can be accepted that limitations or changes or exceptions should be made there. That point has already been raised. Specifically on the A5 the day I was over there, the A1, A3 has also been put out there. Yes, Paul, in respect of the elections taking place in Northern Ireland, there is a need here to be patient, of course, but not too patient. And I take your point. It's very important that communities continue not to lose momentum here. And while I might disagree with Sean, obviously inch by inch can be very sure, but there is a need clearly to break out of the sort of lethargy that might come because people think it's all right when it's not all right, and get stuck into these communities. You've made this point in the Dáil on many occasions. Pascal, you talked about the theme of reconciliation. You made the point about the HGV. The referendum, this is an issue that was discussed, I remember, myself and Dick Spring when he was a young Labour deputy. We did a report on the Irish in Britain and the opportunities for voting opportunities. 70 million worldwide, depending on how far back you go, it's an issue we need to look at. We had always the theme of the American overseas people being able to vote, and yet in the crucial election in respect of the Florida vote a number of years ago, they were too late to be actually counted. So it's what you do. If you take Senator Crown's perspective, you talk about the Senate. Obviously, there's a requirement here in the Constitution to have postal votes for everybody, which cost about $5.65. If you have, depending on how far back you want to go, and send postal votes to be guaranteed delivery to each individual, you have a pretty excessive charge to actually do that. I think what we've decided among the party leaders and the different groupings, that you look at this in 3 or 4 different ways. There's an immediate thing that you can do, which we've already sent over to the CPP and the Senate, to make it much more relevant and effective in terms of its workload, what it can do, how it can have people in to address it, MEPs, secondary legislation, all of these things that the Senate themselves have discussed. The question of looking at the longer term issue is one it's not new ground. We've been there before. Whether it's possible to have people who are working in Western Perth to vote in whatever election, and whether it be the old chestnut of how can you have people, if 35 million Irish Americans want to vote, who don't live here, don't pay their taxes in the jurisdiction. These are arguments that are always put up. It depends on how you consider that. I'm not adverse to having, rising from our discussions, a task force look at these options, but you have to be practical in what it is that we do. In the case of the immigration, how do you put an end to it? put an end to it by developing your economy and understanding that we have a lot of opportunity here. I was in Intel Ireland the other day in Leixlip. The single biggest investment ever made in the history of this state from private enterprise, $5 billion in the last 3 years, which will guarantee and underpin the 5,000 workforce and more who are there for the next 20 years. The entire suite of new opportunities from Intel, Internet of Things and all of this is what's happening here. That's a massive investment and endorsement. Go down here to the Docklands, to Google and Yahoo and Microsoft. They're all down there. And the energy created of these young people has now spread around the world. This is seen as a cosmopolitan city. You have clusters in Galway, clusters in Cork, clusters in Limerick, a lot of activity going on at the universities and institutes of technology. We have the best demographics of any country in Europe for the next 25 years, so there's an excitement here. I'm glad to see that many of these firms send people out for training and experience, and they come back with that gained. So it's a case of actually getting young people will not hang around if there's nothing to do. And that means that government of the day has got to make the changes that grow the economy and provide those opportunities. We think that our education system is flexible enough to cater for the demands that are coming down the line in the next 5-10 years. Where are the jobs going to be in the next 5 years? 60,000 jobs made here last year, new jobs. 40% of those were from companies that are less than 5 years old. So whether it be big data, whether it be analytics, whether it be the cloud and all that comes from that, a lot of stuff in there. And so many others in so many ways that suit the personality of our people. But you have to get your home fires right in the first place. You've got to get your economy right. You've got to run it competently, have a competitive instinct, and that means that attracts jobs in its own right. Glad to say that from that point of view, the pipeline into the country is strong. Equally so, the creativity of a lot of young people going out is very strong, and we hope to build on that. That's the answer to the question, how do you get them to stay? They have to want to stay. They have to understand that this is a place where they can live and work and have their careers and raise families if that's what the situation is. Never easy to get it right at all times. Can we go further in terms of Haas? Danny, the answer is yes. I think the invitation here was from the First and Deputy First Minister. We support that. Parties are now meeting about the platforms and the issues that were raised there. What has been gained, deal with that. We've got to sort this out. President Clinton said it well, finish the job. It won't be finished from outside, it's got to be finished from inside. Frankie Feehan mentioned about the obligation. I accept this. I think this is, you're down there, this is true. I don't see why we can't have a mechanism when this body sends us in its reports from the Joint Chairman or whatever, that we should have an opportunity to debate it and discuss it and follow through and put flesh on the worth and value of what you do here in terms of the time you give. We'll take that up with Joe and Lawrence. Sean, yes, obviously there are huge gaps, but you have to start somewhere. I think it's, at least personally, when I spoke to the survivors of Kingsmill and Ballymurphy, they'd never been down to government buildings before in Dublin. They'd never met Taoiseach of the day. I think it's an important thing to sit and listen to them and talk to them for a couple of hours to get that feeling as to what really is what they want. And what they want is a sense of closure, that despite all of the troubles, 3,000 people blown up, murdered, beaten, and all the rest of it, shot, disappeared. And there's a sad story behind so many doors. And that just won't be closed off by statistics or just by time. There's a release mechanism that's very important personally, and I feel that every time I talk to these groups. So if we start with the past and the flags and the other issues and the parades, surely in a modern world of 2014 and beyond, we shouldn't have a block that's tied only to the past, that prevents so many young people from getting out in front of that with a whole new adventure of what Northern Ireland can be, irrespective of their background or their community. That's where we have to work at it. And I know that you have that interest at heart yourself. I think that's the last of them, Joe. And thank you all for your questions, and appreciate it.